Welcome back to the Equities Go to the Field podcast. Today we're joined by a few guys that have been pushing for high yields over several years. Jeremy Williams from Martinsville, Illinois. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Alan Walters from Marshall, Illinois.
Thanks for having me on.
And John Babcock, their salesman out of Marshall.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
So I got Eric Osland in the house with us as well. So this group has been pushing for high yields for several years, been working at it for a long time. This past fall, this group has been super successful. Today, we're going to mainly talk about corn and some of the management practices and things that they've put into place and the foundations that they've put together to gain some of these high yields and get on that path. So this fall, you guys had some incredible yields.
Yeah, we were blessed this year.
It's been pretty amazing, and it was recognized in the National Corn Growers Association on corn. So just to give the listeners a little bit of a background on the NCGA Yield Contest, for those of you that haven't been involved or don't know much about this contest, it is not easy at all. Some of the stipulations that go into it, your field must be identified no later than probably like the middle of July. I forget the exact date. Middle towards the end of July. So it is before harvest that you have to identify. You can't just go through harvest and then identify the field or, hey, this is the yields we had or pick that great spot. You have to identify that field in July. And then you have to have continuous 10 acres of one hybrid.
Yep, correct.
And then with that, you have to harvest at least 1.25 acres out of that 10. And there's a specific way you have to harvest it. You can't just go in and harvest, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, your first weight, if your corn head is 20 foot, then you have to skip 3 times that. And if your corn head's 30 foot, still 3 times that to get your first acre and a quarter before you have to replicate it.
Well, and also you can't use any andros or anything like that. You've got to be at
It
least.
has to be through the middle of the field.
Correct.
So, and you have to have supervisors present, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
So there's people that watch that. There's somebody watching, making sure the trucks are empty, making sure the combine hopper's empty and everything. So there's
That and the supervisors have to be pre-certified also. You just can't have anybody. There's specific rules for them and what they can be, and you got to have them cleared initially too.
they have to be approved by the NCGA, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So with that, like Jeremy said, I think you guys both run 8 row heads. Is that right?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
So with that, then you harvest 8, then you skip 24, and then you harvest another 8 until you get to that acre and a quarter.
Yeah, every time you make a pass of 8 rows through the field and you have to turn around and come back to achieve your acre and a quarter, you have to skip 24 every time.
So it kind of prevents a little bit of cherry picking at times.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So with that, once you get over 325 bushels per acre, then you have to have a recheck.
Yeah, the one supervisor has to ride in your semi to the certified scale with your truck empty, get a weight, with your truck full, get a weight, and then when you recheck, it's the same thing. And then the other supervisor has to ride in the combine. So then when you recheck, those first passes you made on your initial check, you have to go either on the right-hand side or left-hand side and do it identical the second pass. And it's always your second weight that the NCGA will take after you're rechecked.
So you must take the recheck number.
The way I understand it.
Yeah.
And new this year, you had to take pictures too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the supervisors have to, I think it's hold a yardstick, shuck back every ear to expose the ears, and take a picture with both supervisors with the yardstick and all the ears exposed for one of the clarifications.
And then you also have to have an ear that's broken half that
Yeah.
the supervisors are holding so they can see kernel depth and everything like that.
And before you recheck, that supervisor has to call NCGA and give all the details.
And get clearance
And get
in
clearance to go get
start
your
the
second
second
weight.
recheck.
There's a lot goes into it.
Well, with here, I'm going to go through some of these numbers, and then the kernel depth on these, it had to be about the size of a thumbnail from some of the numbers that I'm going to read off. So Williams Brothers Farm this year, this is the conventional non-irrigated class. Williams Brothers Farm, number 2 in the nation, at 383.86 bushels per acre with decal 7027. So, and it doesn't stop there either, does it, Jeremy? I mean, you guys had some other pretty big checks as well. 6606, DeKalb 6606 went 371.47 bushel, and then DeKalb 114.99 went 324.07.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's phenomenal.
Yeah, we were very blessed this year on how things worked out. I think it's a testament to the way the hybrids have come in the last several years, the way they're changing, and then just, your basic fundamentals of farming practices on what you're doing.
So, and not too far down the road, you had a little bit of competition with the neighbor, Mr. Alan Walters. So, Alan, number one in the state of Illinois in the conventional non-irrigated class. So he had DeKalb 6618 went 374.77, and then also turned in another weight with DeKalb 114.99 at 349.05.
Just still shocking, really. I mean, just
It's impressive.
Everything felt right. I mean,
Like we talked about earlier, you guys made the comment, you had 15, or I guess a total of 15 acres across both of your farms that went over 325 bushels per acre.
Yeah, between both farms, weighing everything for NCGA, we weighed. That's what it ended up being, and we're within 7 to 8 mile as crow flies from each other. And some of the farms that we weighed are a little closer than that, but for those kind of weights on that many acres, it's really amazing.
Amazing is it's impressive. There's no doubt about that. So you guys you're no stranger to pushing for high yields. You've been doing this for several years. Would you mind going through a little bit of the history and how you ended up there, what it looks like? Maybe it didn't start this fall.
No.
So with that, would you mind going through a little bit of a history and the evolution of where you guys are ended up to today?
If you think about it, in my opinion, on our farm, as far back as I can remember, the earliest we started with any kind of new technology or new ideas. In '96, we started with our first variable rate fertilizer applications. And we just kind of built off of that. We took that and we just started doing our own spreading with our own truck. We've always had our own fertilizer truck, always had our own sprayer, our own toolbar, do everything ourselves. And we just kind of built off the fertility side of it. We started putting tile in the ground to help with drainage, helps with nutrient movement through the soil. And just kept building on top of that. In 2012, we put a bunch of technology on our sprayer and our planter both. That's when we first had row clutches, had airbags on the planter for depth control. And since then, we've moved into electric drive on our planter, hydraulic depth control, and started looking more into the fertility side of things. As the yields go up, then your nutrient replacement needs to go up as well, which we're putting back in. In the last couple of years, we've tried to implement not only spreading off of yield maps, but off of soil test, off of a build program, what our goal is to get to where we want to be. So this has been a long time in the making, really diving in on pushing for high yields. We probably started back in 2016, 17, started running our own trials on our own farms, working with John. Him and I and Alan, no different, have had a lot of ideas that we snowball in the wintertime and kind of figure out how we're going to implement it in the season. And then use FieldView a lot to track it and track your dollars in, dollars out, and make sure that you're making money on the ideas you have. Everything we've done on our farm, I've been able to prove that we are making money with it. And if it's something that we've tried, and we've had some things we've tried, and it just didn't build yield or it didn't build dollars. You put more dollars out than you brought back in, so really the juice wasn't worth the squeeze on it. So it's not just a one thing that we go out and do. It's kind of a whole system approach from making sure your planter's putting a seed in the ground like it's supposed to be and managing it through the season, through all the hiccups. You always have to sit there and think, well, if we do this, but if Mother Nature changes things, then you have to go to plan B and figure out how you're going to manage around that. And it's really comes down to paying attention to detail on things. You can have an idea of what's going on in your field, and like we address these, On our farm, and Allen's no different, it's not just a cherry pick spot. Our whole farm is treated. We'll take a 10-acre spot and we'll push for different things. And when we prove it there, then we'll take it across a few more acres. And usually by the third year, it's applied to the whole farm. Every acre is treated the same way. The only thing that would be different would be if there's actual pipe in the ground on some of these farms. Some of the farms that we have tile on, we might push a little harder on than what we do on some other tougher acres, but when you think of the whole broad scale system, it's pretty identical across every acre. Now, we got some that's, some tougher acres that we've changed some practices on what we're doing, and we can get into that later on, but as far as corn goes on our fields, it's pretty much a whole farm how we do things. Like I said, we kind of test it, and then we put it to a couple more farms, and then, like I said, by the third year, it's applied to everything.
So I know where you guys live. It's not necessarily flat and black champagne soil.
No.
So what is the average CEC or organic matter on these farms that you guys pulled these high yields from?
We probably could go with just 10. I mean, some
10's
will
the
be
average CEC.
some will be a little more, some will be a little different, probably in the same pass through the field with the combine.
Yeah.
Probably averaging in that 2.5% organic matter, somewhere
Probably
right in there.
2.5 probably.
Yeah. Sorry.
2.4 to 2.5 probably.
That's impressive. I mean, it's putting tile in the ground's been huge for you guys. Getting the drainage right, I'm sure, has been big. And to pull those yields off of those type of soils, it's impressive.
One thing we learned in 2018 with that was the first time we weighed beans over 100 bushel. And that particular farm, we had only been farming for a couple of years, and we had bought an additional farm next to it, and so we turned it into one field. And the farmers before us are very good farmers, and they had a corn, bean, wheat rotation on that farm, and they had clover in the mix for their cattle. And where we first had our highest weight in beans was where that guy had clover for 30, 40 years in the rotation. So it got us thinking about organic matter and fertility and what that gives back to the ground, and then what that equates to yield. And we saw on the imagery through the summertime, you can pick out where the old line was between the two farms, just off of the amount of the way the corn or the bean plant is out there in the image.
Probably seeing the biomass a little
Yeah.
bit different on that imagery.
Yeah.
So when you guys were heading down this path of high yields, where did you start?
Well, we actually started looking at our soil tests and trying to identify some things there. So obviously you start with pH. We wanted it somewhere in that 6.3 to 6.5 average, which is pretty common for everybody. Phosphate levels was one of them we had to work on. We'd like to see it up closer to that 50 level, and continuing to work on some of that on some of the fields. And then potassium has been a little more important because we had seen anywhere in the past that we've had some higher potassium levels really has helped drive some of that yield on different crops. So we would like to see everything above a 3% base saturation of K. Not easy, but we are still working towards some of that and continue to see improvements. And then from there, we've got into actually soil testing and looking at all the micronutrient levels and different things. And then we moved into some tissue tests to kind of prove some stuff to us of some of the amendments we was making. And that's how we kind of start with things.
So when you're looking at the phosphate and potassium levels, you're talking pounds per acre on the
Yes.
soil test.
Yep.
So after that, where do you go from there? What's the next step?
On the soil fertility, we've actually went and done some more education. So we've actually looked at some of the ratios between some different nutrients. And then, how are we going to apply them and how can these guys apply them? Because everybody's operation's different. So depending on their planter setup and how they're going to handle their nutrient applications, then it kind of comes down to each individual farm of how we're going to handle making some amendments or applications on their farm.
So how much attention do you pay to all the micronutrients?
I don't feel we really started concentrating on them until we felt like we had a better handle on getting our macros where they needed to be. Because if you're already missing, a key macro ingredient on that farm or on that acre, there's no need to be trying to find that silver bullet with a micronutrient or something until you got your other key nutrients in place.
Let's rewind this back to some of the macronutrients a little bit. So this is going to be the one question or one of the big questions from the listeners. Let's talk nitrogen. What do you target per bushel when you're planning this out?
Ideally, we'd like to be 0.8. We've done it before. We've been down like 0.67 pounds per bushel. You can't guarantee that. Depends on your mineralization every year. So safely every year, I feel like when we're putting a plan together, you're between that 0.8 and pound per bushel, just because you don't want to leave anything, you don't want that to be your limiting factor in it.
So when you guys set out to apply nitrogen, which I'm sure you're doing it several times, which we'll get into that. So what's the yield goal? I mean, obviously we hit 383 this year. So what's the yield goal for next year when you start planning next year out?
I mean, obviously 400 bushels in the idea of where we want to be, but we've changed our idea on the farm. We're pushing for a whole farm to field average to finish over 300 and concentrate more on that than just an acre and a quarter or whatever. We're trying to make sure do something bigger than just an acre and a quarter.
Yeah, we actually just look to try to improve year after year, I think, the field overall average and profitability. And then when it comes to harvest time, then we try to identify them areas that, hey, if we got a contest yield here that we think we need to move forward with, then that's when we go for it. We don't actually try to find an area in the field before we even start to soup it up or anything like some others have in the past.
So in general, you're looking at a farm average. You're shooting probably for that 300 bushel mark, and then roughly using 0.8 of a pound of N per bushel. So that would get you in that 240 range. Is roughly what you're shooting for across the farm.
Correct.
Which I'm assuming going to vary a little bit field by field in yield capabilities.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So with that, now we know the total amount of nitrogen that you guys are targeting. And then, like John said, you're probably going to soup it up in a couple different areas trying to get top end yield. But with that, how do you apply your nitrogen?
Ours is all fall ammonia. We do about 150 pounds in the fall, 120, 150, give or take. Nothing with the planter, to run a little starter. That's not counting anything. Then we run a side dress bar or white drop after the crop's up and growing. And that's our final end pass, along with some sulfur.
Ours is pretty similar. We have been doing fall ammonia the last 3 or 4 falls. We'll do roughly around a third, and then we'll do a third with the planter in 2x2, and then finish the third or what we feel like we need in the wide drop pass, V6 to V8 time frame.
So both is a split application and trying to get a little more nitrogen, I'm assuming, towards grain fill, trying to finish that.
Yep, correct.
So, Alan, you mentioned sulfur. How important is sulfur to your guys' fertility programs?
I think it's vital. I mean, we've kind of seen a little bit trials with it. You don't see the streaking anymore we did have before prior to using it. I mean, I think it's part of the realm of nutrition. It's something you don't go away from anymore. It's just, you need to have it.
It is, to me, it's probably the number 4 in the nutrient piece to get right.
That, I don't know that we've actually figured out maybe what our top end with that is yet. I mean, we continue to grow. There's a lot of growers that I deal with that they feel like they got to have some, but maybe they're only going like 2 gallon of ammonium thiosulfate. But we continue to build upon the rates that we're using, and it seems like we like what we're seeing when we do that. And at 300 bushel corn, by the time you build that plant and build that ear, we're probably still not using enough.
We've upped the last 2 years. This will be our 3rd year. We've upped our rate every year.
So do you guys use ammonium thiosulfate as your sole source of sulfur, or do you have different ways that you add sulfur into the fertility program?
Mainly it's ammonium thiosulfate for these two, but I know on Allen used some elemental in the fall.
I used gypsum a few times.
Yep.
It's been some years ago now.
So what is your target amount of sulfur that you're shooting for?
The right amount.
Understandable. Yes, yes.
Well, and that
Get
goes
that.
back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
I don't know that we really truly know where we're at. The one year that Alan actually had the gypsum applied, there was a huge amount of sulfur. I think it was over 100 pounds to the acre of available sulfur, and that was the highest NCGA yield that we had weighed up until this year. I think that was a 314 bushel several years ago.
Yep.
That got us thinking more and more on sulfur at that point. That hey, this was probably not his best field, and still we had that kind of yield with that much sulfur. So that's where we started bringing in some more elemental sulfur along with ammonium thiosulfate, just to try to keep pushing it more and more. And we've done that with multiple crops, just not corn.
Yeah.
And we've both said, I think me and John both said with the gypsum, it just didn't spread. I mean, you could see piles. It just wasn't a good spread job, just how it is.
Yeah, gypsum can be pretty tough to work with from a custom application standpoint.
It was a little different.
It pretty much sucks.
So from a nitrogen standpoint, you guys are doing multiple applications, different timings, trying to, I'm assuming, trying to keep the corn from having a bad day.
Yeah. We changed our nitrogen program it's either between 18 and 19 or 19 and 20. We used to try to side dress with ammonia and felt like we weren't putting enough nitrogen up front to get it to side dress season by doing that. So 19s, when we first bought Y drops, we'd hired a neighbor to do some Y drop work on us, kind of studied that. So then we implemented Y drops into our farm operation and completely changed our nitrogen program. And I feel like our yield stair-stepping up is all from splitting it up into 3 applications and different timings and making sure, like you said, the corn doesn't have a bad day or it's not out there looking for something. Everything is right there when it needs it.
So we've talked about nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur a little bit. What about some of the other micronutrients? Boron, zinc, manganese. Are there some things you guys are doing in that arena, or some things you guys have tried in those arenas that, maybe didn't work, or things that have worked really well?
We're running zinc in furrow. I know there's probably some others we're missing. We've ran some sugar in furrow, ran that. A lot of the boron goes on with Y drop for me at the end.
Yeah, because you have some of these nutrients like boron, they're going to be super mobile in the soil. We have to get those out there pretty much every year, especially when we're talking about raising 380 bushel corn, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think between the soil testing and the tissue testing we've done, we've showed that we're always deficient in boron. That's probably the next thing we're going to concentrate on more. Not that we haven't been doing supplementing of that anyway. I don't know that we're supplementing enough.
So what does your program look like? We talked a little bit about the tissue testing that you're doing. So when you identify a potential deficiency from a tissue test, you're going in relatively quickly trying to remedy that with a particular product, or are you looking at the future, looking for what do we need to be looking at next year?
Initially, when we started with Winfield doing a lot of tissue sampling back in like 2018 time period, we thought we'd come back in to, I guess, do more of a rescue treatment. Now we've took some of that knowledge and we're trying to build, with the products we can, build the soil to have it there for the plant at the right time instead of trying to just play catch up all the time, because that don't work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. If we can keep those nutrients in the soil so the crop has access to them throughout the whole growing season and when it needs it, versus those rescue type applications.
If it's already deficient, you've lost something most likely. I mean, it's already too late.
And we've done more of that concentrating, I think, on ground, especially like now, sitting here looking into 2025 and the prior year here of 24. Not the best farm economy years, so we have concentrated more of our efforts of building some of that on ground that these guys own, at least initially here, because, hey, you're not going to lose that ground, and you can make that investment and feel a little bit better about yourself when you do.
I think a lot of it's just being aware, being out in your crop and being aware on what the crop's telling you, what it needs. Like Alan said, if you get behind, it's so hard to catch back up. We studied with the Y drops, a late Y drop application with micros and nitrogen, and figured out where our wheelhouse is, where we need to put it on for our crop. It may not be for everybody else's crop, but on our farm, what we've studied, this is the time frame that we feel like's the most efficient to get it into the crop when the crop needs it to fill the ear. The stuff, it's already there. If you go out when you first notice it, it's no different than fungicide. If you go out, it's like, oh, found this disease, you're already a week too late.
Obviously, you're doing something right to get the yields that you guys are doing or getting this past year in the NCGA Yield Contest. One question I do, how often are you taking soil tests?
We try every 4 years.
We've got our farm broken into thirds, so a third of the acres gets tested every year. We have in past on certain farms to kind of hone in and study on this nutrient balance on your ratios.
Yeah, the different ratios.
So on a couple farms, we went out on different years and just pulled them myself and used, it was field view, went out, pinpointed exactly where I pulled that out. We sent it off, come back, got the results, kind of studied the field for what we thought, and then make a blanket application for what we thought. Went back a couple years later, pulled the same spot to see, are we moving the needle on this particular thing we're studying right here? But the whole farm still was on that third rotation. We were just pulling out different parts in the field, soil testing that. Took a high yield spot and a low yield spot one year. It was drastic difference on a bean yield. We had some manure laying around, went out, mapped it, spread the manure on it. 2 years later, we had shrank the yield difference in those two spots. Now it's completely different growing season. You could throw a lot of variables in there, but for what we did, we narrowed that gap on those two spots by 30 bushel on beans.
That's impressive. 30 bushel on soybeans is nothing to sneeze at.
No.
Well, it actually, on that field that you're talking about, I mean, it took it from annually, we've seen on climate or on your yield maps, that it was always the worst spot.
Yeah.
And now, depending on the year, I mean, we've seen a time or two since you did that it's actually been close to the best in the field. And that
Yeah.
area that was always the worst and always showed up red, like everybody has areas in their field, now you don't see it.
So you guys are taking soil tests every 3 to 4 years and then using the tissue tests in season to kind of monitor those nutrients as you go throughout each year?
To a degree, on our farm, I don't know that we study those tissues tests like we used to. Because you pull them on, say, a Wednesday, and it's the following Monday before you're going to get results back. A lot of things have changed in that. Either moisture's evaporated and stuff's not moving, or you've got more rain and it's flushed stuff through. I don't know that we really kind of use it as a guideline. I don't know that we just write the check for that. This is what it says, this is what we're doing. I think we kind of use it as a benchmark, like, hey, this is what we tried. Looks like we're still right here, and then adjust from there. I don't know that we use it. Is that
Right. Well, and then some of them nutrients that's showing deficient, or, they're not mobile maybe within the plant. So you could go out 10 days later, pull another tissue sample, and you're still deficient. So, just trying to use it as another way to guide us on some of our other applications throughout the crop growing season every year, instead of like, oh, I'm going to use this one and I need more of this right now. It's to guide us in the future and to look at other applications in future growing seasons to come.
So you guys will take that and then you'll take your soil tests, kind of build the plan out for the year, look at yield results, study those at the end of the season, what worked, what didn't, probably trying a few different things in different areas, whether it be boron or whether it be sulfur or different nitrogen practices. You guys look at that, take that into consideration and put a plan together for the next year and just continue to build on that.
I think we're working on 2026 today. Like, I think there's different aspects of the whole growing season, past and present, things you're doing on your farm that you adjust all year long. I mean, on our farm, our plan's ever evolving. We're always adjusting, tweaking different things. For instance, I feel like we set maximum yield for 2024 on May 11th in 2023. May 11th, 2023, we were done planting everything in 23 by May 6th. And cleaned our corn planter up, went through it, made sure everything was adjusted and everything's ready to go for the 2024 growing season. I feel like that's where we set maximum yield potential for the 24 growing season, was when I had the planter ready to go and put it in the shed for the year.
And then throughout the year, I mean, from the time that crop the year before is planted, you're learning from that crop of what you maybe already have done wrong or right to adjust for the crop that's not even put in the bag for you to plant the next year yet.
Well, no different. I mean, just like you said, in 2020, when the planter we have now, we put a bunch of new technology on it. We got done planting, and we planted everything that year, 34 days, no different than this year. We had a window, and we hit it. So Alan's done it too. You go out and you do a flag test at emergence and figure out how many plants you get up within the first 12 hours. You go back 12 hours later, how many more plants came up. That's kind of where you start building for the year. And you don't start there. It's just part of the process of, if you don't get them out of the ground, your yield's already taken a ding to begin with.
So when you guys start out in the year, you're getting ready about this time of year right now.
Right.
So you're starting to look at the planter, making sure everything's ready to go, because you want that thing to be field ready right when the opportunity presents itself in the spring.
Yep.
So what steps are you guys taking with the planter right now to make sure you're ready to go?
Just checklist is long. I mean, opener's good depth of the gauge wheels and that spaced right. Just is your monitor up to date? I mean, just everything that can cause an issue. Electric harness, did a mouse chew a wire? I mean, that's the problem now. We went like Jeremy to VSET meters. It's all electric now. Mice chews a wire and you got a bad day. I mean, everything's working, you're good to go. I mean, that's the technology has changed. I mean, and one thing that I noticed we put smart firmers on my planter in 21, and John seen it, it rained, and he said, "What's the difference in this farm?" And I couldn't figure it out. Took me a little bit. We'd had a rain wash the residue all away. And just emergence was so great, you could track it all the way through harvest. And it was a lot better where the residue was all gone. It was just kind of enlightening, but with smart firmer, you wouldn't have seen it because it showed clean furrow was spotless. And it was just amazing to see that, but what technology can show you now is scary.
Well, and going back to that on one of Allen's fields, probably about the same time period, we've seen differences of which tillage tractor they ran with the smart firmer. I mean, you could see the difference on some maps with that if you dial it down fine enough, and then trying to figure out why you have a difference, whether it be clean furrow or your Delta Force or something, was showing some different things it was doing. You don't realize how much every pass, anything you do in a field shows up a year later potentially in yield.
Oh, absolutely. And I think both of you brought it up early, going out early, doing the flag test, checking emergence. Is there anything specific that you guys do to the planter to make sure that emergence is perfect or as close to perfect as possible?
When I went to the 2020 monitor, Jeremy always said SRI is a big one. Just keep that in the green and you're good. And I mean, yeah, you can, if you ever think to punch on the iPad where it goes high, punch it. I mean, you can see that 2-point difference. I mean, it's noticeable.
What is SRI?
Seed release index, how it comes off the meter. And he kind of said it, and I just kind of was playing like, let's do a screw up. Let's try it. Let's mess it up and see what it does. And there's something to it. I mean, it's scary. I mean, the technology we have now is scary to what you can learn.
Well, and on our farm, we've ran precision monitor 2020 since 2012. And we started working with Kyle Dosenbrock, and what that guy has brought to our farm is huge on dialing in on what your planter needs. And he talked on your guys' podcast about the block test on your depth wheels, your gauge wheels. I just took a piece of plywood and we ripped some boards down to 2 inches, and you go under every row with a floor jack, and we went through and I set on our 24-row planter, measured every row. 3 rows at 24-row planter are set at a different depth than the rest of them. That's 12.5% of our planter is at a different depth than the rest of it. And I think that's key, is to make sure that everything on your planter, before you leave the shed or the driveway, you have set yourself up for maximum yield just from the planter standpoint on it.
Because there's no way you're going to be able to see that when you're putting that seed in the ground.
Those were on brand new gauge arms on your planter, brand new out of the box. And Kyle had told me, he said, don't be surprised if you don't find some variants. And we did. Brand new equipment that I put on a retrofitted planter was wrong as far as the depth on your planter from the start. So if you would have put brand new parts on there, everything's brand new, why you need to check it? And it was still 12.5% of the planter was wrong. So this year, I got our bean planter in the shop right now, going through, and we're not adding any new technology or any new parts to the planters new for the year. It's just routine maintenance that he come out in August, went through the planter with me. I knew we were getting some wear on some things. He deals with it every day, so he could go through, and about half the time it'd take me to figure out where we need to concentrate on this. And he come up with a checklist and went through, and we studied what we needed to do and not do for finances this year. And so we're just doing routine stuff, but that routine stuff sets your base, you can't go under that. If you've got your level set at a 10 and you're going out there with a planter with a 5, you'll always be a 5 or above. You won't be a 10 or above. But if you go and you pay attention to the details from the start, you just set yourself up better from the beginning.
So talking about getting yourselves set up for spring and a good start, what do you guys do for seed bed preparation?
Basically, what we do in the fall, we run a disc and bean stubble or a field cultivator. We take the hair off and make ridges dry out better. It's kind of what we've always kind of little ridges dry out better. We've did that both ways. Either or, we'll run fall ammonia. We'll do that. Then come spring, if we have to burn it down, we'll burn down, lay down some cutworm chemical. We'll run 1 to 2 passes with a cultivator, just depending on the farm, how it worked up. We may stale seed bed it. If we lay it down and it rains, we can stale seed bed it. I mean, we're usually that 1 to 2 pass in the spring. Just varies on the year. And we come in and plant it.
We've kind of changed our practices over the years since 2020. Before we did some farms, but since 2020 hardcore, we've tried to plant all of our beans first. And what that allows is for your bean yield to reach maximum potential. But on your corn acres, you're not out there when it's too wet, and you're not out there when it's too cold. We typically try to wait. I did 2 years in a row, studied soil temperature, and we waited till it was 55 for a couple days, soil temperature, consistency, and that's usually second, third week of May. But by doing that, our corn's up 5 to 6 days. It's not taking 3 weeks to get out of the ground, and it's not stressing. So I think your soil temperature has a lot to do with it. We went to a neighbor's farm, had a soil pit one year, had an agronomist from southern Indiana come up and talk to us. And he told all of us that we were beating the oxygen out of our soil, working it too many times. And on the way home, my dad and my uncle that I farm with, we all talked about it. It's like, yep, that's what we're doing. So we try to, the best we can, on our bean stubble that we're planting the corn, work at one time. If we can try, some of the ends, some of the ditches, some of the tougher spots, we'll go work it, and then we'll just work the field to finish and try to work at one time, and you don't beat the oxygen out of the soil. And typically when you're out there the second, third week of May, it's warmer, it's drier, and you're not creating the compaction that you do earlier in the year when it's too wet.
That's impressive. The thing that would be hard for me is to hold off until the middle of May.
It's difficult to see all your neighbors go into the field, getting phone calls from some of your neighbors, like, what are you doing? But
Maybe watch some of your neighbors be done planting corn before you even start.
We have, but when you can study it on your farm and you worry about your farm and you make ROI on your farm, because that's what pays your bills at the end of the day, that's just what we decided to do. And all three of us, my dad and uncle, were all on the same page. We're all committed to doing it right. It's been a struggle. We've had to go find things to do to keep us from watching the sunshine. But you're out there in Carhartts. In 2017, we did that. We all planted corn in our Carhartts. And the week after we got done, we got 13 inches of rain. We did it all over again in the second week of May, and we still had amazing yields in 2017. So we kind of took that as a lesson. It's like, okay, apparently that was the wrong time to plant. We should have waited till the second week of May.
But you guys are, I mean, planting soybeans early
Yes.
is what you're doing, and making sure everything's ready to go when you do catch that. I'm assuming that soil temperature, you want, what, 3 or 4 days of 50-degree temps? above
Ideally, you'd like
50?
to have 3 or 4 days above 55 and be consistently. You kind of watch the forecast a little bit. It's like, last year we didn't plant, all of our corn was planted May 16th and May 22nd. And we didn't quite have our beans all planted by then. And our goal was to get them all planted. We just, with the way Mother Nature worked out and the year worked out, we had a window there, the third week of May. And so we hit it hard, planted our corn, planted our milo, went back, finished planting our beans. And then, like I said, when your corn comes up in 4 to 5 days and it's even and every one of them comes up and you don't have a water hole over here, you got to go run some corn back in because the emergence wasn't as good, germination wasn't as good. You're not creating compaction, getting to that wet hole, driving through standing corn to patch a hole in. Typically we've had good success waiting, and you've got to be patient.
It's funny to watch the smart firmer of an evening or a morning, just how much it cools off.
Yeah,
I mean, that
for sure.
you dig of a morning, yeah, it's cool, but you don't put a number to it till you see it. I mean, that's the part to me the first year with it, and it's like, man, you lose that sun and it goes down in a hurry.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to watch that because you would sit there and not think, well, it just went from 62 degrees and now it's down to 45 and maybe an hour and 20 minutes, an hour, depends how quick the sun goes down, what the air temperature is, but it'll cool off. And the smart firmer also allows, that I've noticed, is it's got a moisture reading, your soil moisture on there. Never really paid, you always pay attention to it in the past, but having that kind of information right there, knowing the wind's blowing, it feels like it's dry out, but you're still in 40% moisture. You don't leave it alone. You don't put it down any deeper. But if you're going through and you're losing moisture, it's like, well, break it out and set the planter down. This is what the information's telling you to do, and studying that through the field and knowing where your parameters are and what you need to do with your seed to get it right from the start.
So will you guys actually change the planter throughout the day
Yeah.
based on your
Well,
smart firmers and what they're telling you?
Yes.
2 years ago, as was planting corn around home, moved out further west, had it run the depth back home, never had really changed it, and pulled into a farm, backed up in a corner, started going, and the smart firmer is showing red on soil moisture. And I'm like, man, it went 10 feet. Okay, let's just go look, and it wasn't going to work where it was at. Set it back down 2 notches, was in the green, and it's like, whoop, I would have planted the end rows and basically done a pass on the field wherever we went out and checked it. I mean, just instantly you knew it was wrong. It was not going to work. And back home was fine at the depth it was at. Just out there it wasn't.
Well, I noticed this year I started planting, I think it was 6:30, 7 o'clock one evening, and just planted my rows first, and the moisture was coming up. And you could see it on the smart firmer, and you could start to see it pick up on the depth wheels. And so I quit, went to the shop, put the planter up for the night, and didn't get back to that field for another day and a half, just how the weather worked out. And the center of the field came up better than those end rows came up, even though it was in the ground a day and a half sooner. And I think a lot of it had to do with just the moisture and compaction.
So when you guys got the planter, went through that, you've got a portion of your nitrogen on. Next to me is the hybrid. So how do you guys select your hybrids? What do you do to make sure that you get the right hybrid, right field? I'm assuming that's part of the situation.
You got to place the hybrid for the right farm. If you plant a wet hybrid on a dry field or vice versa, if a hybrid ain't made for wet feet, it's not going to be a good ending. I mean, you got to place it where it needs to be.
I don't know how many people would realize this, but the hybrid we got the 383 with, we started planting on our farm 6 years ago. It wasn't the latest technology. I mean, some of the latest technology we had great success with, but that specific hybrid has been consistent on our farm for 6 years now.
And I think that hybrid was my highest NCGA in 19. That same hybrid that he won with was my first hybrid, but was my best NCGA way prior.
So I think just studying what works on your farm, and a key to all of this all together in reality is it's not It's not just David, Terry, and Jeremy Williams that's going after this. It's not Alan and Philip Walters that's going after this. You know, we're working with John Babcock. We're working with all the agronomists from the seed departments that we work with. We're working with guys on our equipment. I mean, there's a lot of people's brains go into this plan and go into this success. It just happened to be on our farm where we achieved this. So it's a lot of things that go together. You have close relationships and build a core team, and you rely on their experience and their information to know your farm, and you know your farm and where your limits are. They know the hybrids and where the limits are, and they can help guide you to the success. You don't just pick out, plot information. Well, up in Shelbyville, this one won every time. Well, this is Clark County. That's not Shelby County. Or in Wabash County, this worked every time. Well, to me, that's more of a drier climate, more of a tougher acre. Maybe we could build a little bit more on that by bringing a tougher acre hybrid up to Clark County and pushing it a little harder. So I don't know where it starts and ends. I think it's just a lot of things that, for us, it's what we've studied on our farm, where we've had success, and bringing the people where they've had success and putting it all together, and just having a lot of trust. And they know what they're doing. We feel like we know what we're doing. You put it together.
So with that, as we move on into the season, what's the first step of weed control?
The first step's gonna be actually before we even start the tillage on at least both of these farms, because like Jeremy said, if you're wanting to get by with maybe one pass with tillage to try to not work the oxygen out of the soil, you're gonna have to have a clean field to be able to even think you're gonna accomplish that. So we're gonna run, whether it be a burn down situation or potentially some years, maybe even a fall application with herbicide to be able to accomplish that. And then, then we build from there. I mean, in both cases, it's gonna be a 2-pass, pre-emergent and then a post-emergent application to get good weed control on their farms.
So what are you doing to manage water hemp? I mean, that's been an issue for a long time. Do you guys have much of an issue with it or trying to control it?
Don't cheapen the chemical program.
Yeah. On our farm, personally, like I said, we've always sprayed our own, so nothing against an equity or any other retailer. But when you can take care of yourself and spray your own, you're going to get it done when the time's right. So the weed pressure on our farm, I think, has been something that my dad and uncle have been keyed in for years. And that still is shown today because you just don't have that weed bank there. Even whenever Roundup first come out, we were still heavy non-GMO, and those chemical programs were different than just waiting until July and calling up a retailer like, well, everything's getting pretty big, let's throw some Roundup out there. And then that's kind of created where we are with Roundup today. So I think you have to be very diligent on your chemical program, and yeah, it may cost a lot, but at the same time, there's been all kinds of studies that shows how much a weed will rob yield in the end by leaving it out there.
Yeah, I think, how much yield you're potentially robbing, but then like you just said, one water hemp plant, the amount of seed that starts to build up in that seed bank, that's another issue with letting the weeds out there, and why I think we have to stay pretty strong on those chemical programs.
Correct.
Even in where you guys are growing these 380 bushel, 370 bushel corn crops, you're putting the same chemical program, you're putting your strong pre-emerge residuals out before that crop, or at planting time, as you are on the other acres, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because you'll hear that sometimes where in some of these yield contest situations, there's growers that might, well, I don't want to put the residual out there at the time of planting because it's too hard on the crop.
Yeah.
And, I think you guys are kind of a testament that you can still manage weeds the way that we know is the best way, without causing that yield loss that some of those guys are talking about.
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like everybody's been told multiple places for the information on weed control, multiple modes of action in your herbicide program, and that's what we've done. And these guys, I got to hand it to them. I mean, I work with a lot of customers, but besides just that typical 2-pass, I mean, they're both going to be out there. I mean, if there's some weeds in the edge or a corner, they're going to either be spraying it with a hand sprayer or pulling a few water hemp plants, and that could be key to keeping them weeds at bay in the future.
So what does your tank mix look like from your weed control, from your herbicide pass on the post-emergent side? Are you putting anything else in there in that ride that's contributing to some of these high yields besides the herbicide?
I'll let Spank answer for me, because we basically last year didn't do anything post. It was all after the planter planted. So I'll let Spank take care of mine.
Yeah, actually with the herbicide, I don't think we really, with the post herbicide, I don't think we're putting any nutritionals or anything with that pass. It's after that where we're gonna do, whether it would be the fungicide or something like that. So, I mean, we're strictly controlling weeds when we go out there.
Well, and I think about on our farm, one of the reasons we don't is we have the availability to go in and side dress it through wide drops and put the nutritionals there instead of putting it with the herbicide. And like we talked about, you have fungicide pass and you can find something to throw in there that's going to work, and you're already making that pass anyway, so then you're just out whatever the nutritional or the additional thing you're doing is costing you, if it's worth it.
Is there any specific time that you're pushing for that post pass with your chemistry?
Before the weeds emerge. I mean, I think if you, like you guys have always said, you start clean, stay clean. We've done it on beans and we've done it on corn. That you know the time to go out there, and you go out there and you walk the fields, like there ain't much out there, but you've already got the program planned and you stick with it.
So how about fungicide? When's your first application of fungicide going on?
For me, last year would have been a 2-pass program, but due to the weather, we went down to 1 pass. Didn't think the yield was there. I mean, we made a management decision. The yield wasn't there, we didn't think. So we went to 1 pass. Moving forward from here on out, I'm going to run Xyway 3D foam. So we'll have that, and we'll make another pass at probably brown silk, VT brown silk, somewhere there. That'll be our plan moving forward.
We've done several different trials on what's been the best. And when we added 2x2 to our planter, it gave us the availability to run Xyway. So this will be our 3rd or 4th season putting Xyway down with the planter and then coming back. Sometimes we've done it at tassel, sometimes wait till brown silk and done another application. A few years ago we did 2 passes, I believe, and between the first pass and second pass, it was a heavy disease pressure year. And I think there was,
Tar spot.
yeah, I think maybe we had 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks timing between the 2 applications, and we saw significant gain by having 2 passes of fungicide down. One of them was, I think, B10, B12, and the other one we came back at brown silk. And then we decided from that information we would utilize the equipment we had, and that's when it kind of drove us into moving into Xyway at the planter pass.
What kind of products are you guys using in your VT brown silk applications?
Typically, we try to go for what's going to give us the longest coverage. Just because it says 14 days, in reality, you're probably at 10.
Well, and then we're also, I think on both of them, in that pass, we're adding our product Mach 7 in with that pass also. Been proven many times by that it's just created more yield, so it's kind of been more of a standard thing that it's going in at that, say, VT time period with the fungicide. And in both cases, it's been more of a premium fungicide at that time. There's been some times we've found that we've used some generics at the right time of year, maybe like a V5 or something, but when you're with tar spot, seem like it's more and more on the radar screen, and we've had issues and we've seen some severe losses to that on some fields in the past. We try to stick with a fungicide at that VT time period with 3 modes of action in it, and then throw Mach 7, and that's pretty much been it.
How do you guys apply your fungicides?
We have a Hagee that the farm owns, and that's what we used to between that and the planter pass. That's what we use. We haven't done any drone work. We had a plane a year when it was too wet. We didn't feel like we could get the Hagee out there. We decided to pull the trigger and do the plane. In reality, when the plane flew, we could have been putting it on with the Hagee, because just the time frame of getting on the schedule for the plane, but we already had a schedule, so that's what we did. Typically, we just do it ourselves with our Hagee.
Ours is done with a plane, and or drone could do it too. But
So once we get past the fungicide applications, we set our eyes on harvest then. So when do you guys start thinking about taking the combine to the field? How do you prioritize that?
It all goes to fact, when did you plant, how's it drying down? We've always picked wet corn, always have, 30% corn, we're starting, take it slow, get the beans ready, then move to beans, but, I mean, anytime we've shelled a field or left part and came back, phantom yield loss is a real reality that we've seen, witnessed. Can't explain it where it goes, but it is real. I mean, I feel we lose more by waiting till it gets drier. And I know this year we had some get 13%. We lost some. But with no rain all fall, I mean, it happens. I mean, we didn't, I mean, the last 2 years we've dried 500 gallon of propane. That's it. I mean, we've always dried 3 to 6,000. I mean, it's just part of the habit. It just happened, and it just dried too quick on us. And that's been my main thing. You always want to pick wet corn and try and get contracts filled and out of the way. That's just the main thing. Why it's empty. That's my main thing for me, is try and get it done out of the way.
I think for me, it's a little bit different, no different what Alan said, but, you know, when you get your combine ready, it's no different getting your planter ready. Want your combine to run the most efficient it can run, to be able to not have any loss. We've added some different attachments to our corn head to try to prevent that loss. No different if you shell 15, 16% corn or 22 to 23% corn, you're going to have more butt loss from the ear, more head shelling basically. I think it was 2017 or 18. We started shelling. We ideally want to start shelling corn as 25%, and we don't want to shell anything under 20%. We've well, in 17 we knew what we had in propane that year. Kind of had a rough guesstimate on the electricity for bin fans running the leg, stuff like that. And the price of corn that year, price of propane that year, and the yield loss that year, we were making $25 an acre shelling 22% corn over 18% corn. It's hard for people to understand. It all depends on your setup, though, it's whether you have a dryer or not, whether you can efficiently do it or not. But I do feel like the elevator is going to charge more than you do it at your own farm, but I do think there is gain there as well as paying the elevator to dry it. And I think where some of the phantom yield loss comes in, when you're shelling 15, 16% corn, there is more dust in the air than if you're shelling 22 to 25% corn. And I think some of that is the outside layer of the corn kernel is flaking off, and that's part of your yield loss, is in the weight of the kernel rather than having it at 22 to 25% corn. I could be wrong. It's just what we've noticed on our farm.
I mean, I can't remember who said it now. Maybe one of you can remember. The big thing is you want that corn plant green that year dead.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that, and it's like, we've always been made fun of. What are you doing? Picking corn. Why? It's so green. Corn's 30. Corn's 25. No, it ain't. It is. I mean,
That's been amazing to me over several years. When you're using fungicides, you're splitting the nitrogen application. You're doing a lot of things to keep that corn plant alive. And it's amazing how green some of that corn can be and still be 25% moisture.
and you can go to that devastator where it's crushing the stalk and it's like soaking wet. I mean, it's eerie to see, but it's great. It's like, hey, you know it's standing. You know it ain't gonna go down.
And unfortunately, when you've got, it's hard to outrun some of the weather in the fall.
Yeah.
This past year, September, probably one of the hotter ones we've had on record in a long time. There was a lot of days that were pretty warm, and so to outrun the moisture is pretty tough.
You like the weather for the harvestability, but you don't like the weather for how quick it dries the corn down, in my opinion. Because you can lose several points of moisture in a week's time, and there's just nothing you can do to try to get there any quicker. You can only run harvest so efficient. And so the weather is amazing, but it's killer to your corn moisture, because once that corn, some of these hybrids, once that corn starts drying down, it just takes off. And so the key is to try to get there. And we tried to set up on our farm, one of the things we planned in the winter last year, it's like, okay, let's adjust our bean varieties to when it's going to be harvest so we can get corn squeezed in there. And so we tried to leave a gap between our earlier beans and our later beans, like, okay, this is where we're going to try shell corn. And that's part of the management practice of adjusting to try to get maximum yield on your beans, maximum yield on your corn, and maximum efficiency altogether through harvest.
Guys, sure appreciate the conversation around corn. If you had to tell the listeners 1 to 2 things that you think are essential when going after high yield corn, what would those be?
For me, not to knock spring ammonia. I mean, fall ammonia, proven on my farm year after year, has been the best. I mean, that's not saying the spring can't be as good either. I'm not saying that, but just for me, fall ammonia has been better. It does something to it. It's not streaky in the spring. And for me, plant when it's right. Don't push it. Do it when it's right. Let things fall in line. You may have to watch your neighbor plant, like you said. Just do it when it's right.
I think it's different on everybody's farm. I think you have to study your farm and talk to people, get some knowledge, and then apply it to your farm and try it. I think first of all, you're going to have your fertility in the right spot. 'Cause if you don't have fertility in the right spot, you're never going to make it. You might hit the one-off year where you had some really good success, but when you take that out, if you don't replace it or build it, you're not going to replicate it. And I think also is starting out the year right, making sure your planter is right, making sure your field conditions are right. If you wake up of a morning and all you have is a donut, a bowl of ice cream, by 9 o'clock you're gonna be ready for a nap. If you wake up and you have a sausage patty and some eggs, by 9 o'clock you're raring to go because that protein's getting in your body and it's making you feel good. So if you want a fat, lazy corn plant, don't feed it. If you want one that's active, it's no different than all these athletes. You don't see these athletes eating donuts and ice cream for breakfast. They've got their bodies conditioned to perform at maximum efficiency. And your corn, bean, wheat, milo, it doesn't matter. Everything need to be treated the same way. You need to have your nutrition there for it when it needs it to have. But I think that's different on everybody's farm. I don't think I can say this is what works. I don't think Alan can say this is what works. I think you have to apply it to your own farm, make your own decisions, and then you'll succeed on that.
And for me, I think a farmer that hasn't done this, you got to get that